then the DSDT is a negative 2. The STP equals negative 2.
No, it's the DRDT.
No, the DRDT is the radius of the sphere, which is 37.
So,
Oh, we're looking for DSDT.
Yeah.
right, we're looking for DSDT. So what information do we have? What are we given?
We have DRDT,
We have DRDT, right?
which is a negative
It's
2.
C.
Exactly, it's decreasing. So DRDT, bless you.
I got it right.
I got it right too.
Turkey.
Right, and at this instant,
Got
the radius is
Just
3.
a wow.
So,
Wow.
after I took my derivative here,
Oh, good.
I know my DRDT is negative 2,
We know that R is equal to 3.
and R is 3. So I can just plug that information in now and get DSDT is 8 times pi times 3 times negative 2. So let's see.
Yeah, where's this?
No, it was like an upside down calendar.
So the first one. Yes, number 3 on the quiz was a cone problem.
What was upside down? Does that change anything?
No.
No, but like.
I
I definitely just drew it as a regular code. I did not draw it.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't really matter. All right, we okay with something like this? Okay, this is hopefully a
This
pretty
is
straightforward related
This
radius
one was
problem.
easy.
And I mean, this is a problem from a previous AP test. I'm not sure what test this was on, but it was within the last 10 years or so. So something like this is absolutely fair game on the AP test.
Can we just have like 6 of those right in a row? I might just.
Maybe. All right. So how did the Ed puzzle go?
Good.
Pretty easy.
My handwriting just kind of died halfway through it, and it just.
I was just very sleepy and I didn't get to my homework till like 11 o'clock, so it's just like,
And I was like trying to like
Blue.
be in the mood. And my grandma was serious question.
What's up?
The seniors lost day of school May 17th. And I was like, no, like this if they want to be the seniors lost day of school May 17th. She's like,
hey, we're seniors. I don't know what I'm gonna do without high school.
What are you gonna do without friends?
Make new friends.
All right. So in the video, we went all the way through this first example here. Okay. In this first example, to find absolute mins and maxes, what did we have to do?
Take the derivative.
We had to take the derivative. So what all points were we looking for? We were trying to find a bunch of different types of points that we needed to test, right?
Endpoints, points where it equals 0,
Points where what equals 0?
the derivative,
Right.
and then where it will not, when it's undefined.
Right.
Squish, squish.
So, in order to find absolute mins and maxes, I need to test all of these points, right? I need to test the endpoints of an interval. So, on each of these problems, we are given an interval, right? I'm told this in this first example, our interval was -1 to 2. So, those are both x values, right? Those are the x values I would need to test. I need to find where the derivative equals 0. Right? Wherever the derivative equals 0, I have a horizontal tangent, meaning I either have a hill or a valley, right? And wherever the derivative is undefined. We looked at graphically why this is significant, right? We could have a corner that's, a minimum or a corner that's a maximum. So I need to find where all of these places exist. So, on number 2, since we already did number 1 in the video, well, I know my endpoints that I need to test are 0 and 2 pi. Then I need to figure out where my derivative is equal to 0. How do I do that? Find the derivative. So what is my derivative? Minus 2 cosine.
This one's like a whatever. That's when it's like cosine 2x.
this looks similar to one of the double angle identities, where we would have a 2 in here, but it's not exactly that. Yeah, so this isn't quite an identity. So if I set this equal to 0 now. Wait, say that again? What's negative 1/2? Almost. So if I subtract the 1 over, yeah, it'll be positive 1/2, right? So I'll divide by negative 2. So I'll get cosine is equal to 1/2. So where does that happen?
It's 60 degrees.
So on the unit circle. So at 90, this is the point 0, 1.
So it's either
It's 60.
So at 60 degrees, what's my coordinate?
Oh, I was thinking 1/2 pi.
Yeah, we want the actual x coordinate.
1/2
1/2 square root of 3 over 2.
That's what I
Yeah. Are there any other places where
yes.
So the bottom is 7.
yeah, down here, right?
Yeah, and then that side.
No, that's negative.
Yeah, that is.
Yeah, over here we would have negative cosine.
Yeah. Okay.
So what? So we said this one was pi over 6. What's the one on the bottom?
1.
How many people are saying so many people about the I have sensory overload? I have no idea. Is it 11 pi over 2? Shut up.
11 pi over 6 would be this one right here.
Oh no, I have it somewhere. Wait, is it?
9 pi.
I have no idea what's going on.
All right, so let's back up a second.
I just don't understand because everyone's talking like at the same time that Matt's talking. That I don't even know what he said.
All right, let's back up a step. So are you good to hear? We got cosine equals 1/2.
Okay.
So now on the unit circle, we have to figure out where that's true, where the x value on the unit circle is 1/2. So we determined that one of those places was at pi over 6, or at pi over 3, right?
And so 5
5 pi over 3.
So at pi over 3, right? And then down here, at this value on the unit circle, that would be 5 pi over 3, right? So those are my candidates, right? Those are the values I need to test. Are there, I guess first, so we found our endpoints, we found where the derivative equals 0. Are there any places where this derivative would be undefined? Any corners, cusps, vertical tangents, discontinuities? It's a good question. When we're plugging in the values, yeah, I mean, we don't need to worry about trying to calculate a bunch of these by hand. For this first part, though, I want us to get used to doing it without a calculator, like finding the derivative and solving for where the derivative equals 0. But yeah, when we plug these in, we can use a calculator. All right, so there are no places where the derivative is undefined, right? Cosine is continuous everywhere, no corners, cusps, vertical tangents, anything like that. So we found our 4 places that we need to test. 0, pi over 6, 5 pi over 3, and 2 pi. At one of those, we are guaranteed to have our absolute max, and at one of them, we are guaranteed to have our absolute min. Right? So let's plug them in. So I'll make my little table here. So I'm plugging in 0, plugging in pi over 6, we're plugging in 5 pi over 3, and we're plugging in 2 pi. So go ahead and do this on the calculator. Oops, put pi over 6, didn't I? Yeah, sorry, I wrote pi over 6 accidentally. It's pi over 3, not pi over 6.
Shame on you. You messed up.
So remember, we're taking these values and plugging them into my original equation now, right? Because I want to see what the actual value of the function is. We use the derivative to figure out these potential places where we would have an absolute min or max. Then I want to take them and plug them into the original to get the actual value. So yeah, on these you can use decimals. And remember, always to 3 decimal places. And technically by AP rules, you can either round or truncate. Yeah, I know, you guys all hated that word. For, I don't think we should get an error.
You shouldn't.
It's very tough.
Oh, mine broke off.
How did you? Okay,
I might have done something wrong.
because that does not look right compared to my answers.
Are you in the right mode?
Probably not.
So remember, we should be in radian mode
Yeah, I'm in radiance.
I'm in radians and I'm getting 0
for everything.
Yes.
The only one that I got different for you was 5 or 3.
I have 0 for 2, and then I have the same value, just one negative and one positive.
You have to put parentheses around it.
Wait.
Yeah, for pi over 3. Wait, why are you plugging in 0?
Oh, yeah, I did every time. Okay. Go for A class. Give me a second. There we go.
Looking a little better.
It's been so long since I've used one. I forgot.
So did our table turn out something like this? So where is my absolute minimum value? Absolute minimum value occurs at pi over 3. So I'll write the whole coordinate. So pi over 3, negative 0.685. And then where is my absolute max? 5 pi over 3. And that value is 6.968.
On the AP test, would this be like, do you think this will be a multiple choice answer, or will this be more like a standard form?
Something like this would probably be a multiple choice question. And they would only ask you for one or the other. They're not going to ask you for both like within a multiple choice question. They would just say, what's the absolute max of this function on this interval? But we would still have to go through that whole same process, right?
Will they give us like how like we're going to have to put it, or you can plug it in?
Well, that's a good question. They'll ask you one of two things. They'll ask you where is the absolute max. So if they ask you where the absolute max is, where means x value. Right? Where does this occur? They want the x value. Or they could ask you, what is the absolute max? If they ask, what is the absolute max, that's the y max. Okay? So, and we're going to talk about this idea a lot more. I'll remind you of this a lot more in the future, but that was a great question to introduce that. Okay? They ask you, where does the max occur? The x value. What is the max? They want the y value. Okay? So most of the time, they'll only want one or the other. There's very few times I've seen where they even want the whole coordinate point. Okay? We okay with those? All right, so let's take a few minutes now, and you guys try C and D. It does say calculator active. All right. So on C, okay, you can even use your calculator to solve the problem. Okay, when you find the derivative and then set that equal to 0, you can use your calculator to figure out where those points are. Yes.
I feel like I did this change thing wrong.
Yes. So remember,
Is C and D change?
yes. So it's easiest if we write it like this to see the layers. Right? So what's the outermost layer? The square. Right, yeah, so the 0 and 3 pi over 2 would be like these two, my endpoints that I would need to check. So, yeah. Yeah, so these are my endpoints of the interval in question. But then I also need to check to see if there are any other critical numbers, right? Any places where the derivative equals 0 or any places where the derivative is undefined.
Okay, so it's that, right?
Yes,
Okay.
that works better.
Okay.
Correct. Well, you might want to factor, look for a GCF, maybe.
Oh my god, I didn't have a math.
Years.
Isn't it like sine squared plus cosine squared?
Oh, yeah, that's the thing. I don't think any of those identities show up here.
There would be a case where we could use it.
Yeah, absolutely. If you see a sine squared plus cosine squared, you just plug in one for that idea.
I got lost in this.
So, are you
I did my two sine.
good here with the derivative? So all I did there is both of my terms have sine, right? This is one term, this is my other. So I took out a sine, and then I'm just left with 2 cosines plus 1.
So that doesn't just make it like one sine, cosine plus one. If I take like, or the two connected to both, so that's one.
Yeah, I mean, this is just 2 times sine times cosine. So the only thing I took out was the sine. So the 2 and the cosine are still there.
I'm just
If a number, like, okay, so when you solve that, you just said sine over 0 and then, okay, then you get negative 1. So maybe that's cosine.
Yeah, so that's not.
Yeah, so then you plug it in.
saying is where on the circle does cosine equal negative 1 half?
Oh, okay.
And the other one is where cosine equals. Yes.
So then we use one of them and
Not 2 pi because we're only going from 0 to 3 pi over 2. For the sign. What ends?
So then that's an inch value, right? So it's a pi over 2.
I believe so, yeah.
Well, 0 is only 1.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah, we would get 0 for a couple of them.
No, it was not.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, but I don't think science squared or
Just like we
That's not
do when we rewrite it, you put in sign of x, and parentheses is So if I rewrite this, say, sign of x squared,
No, this is no. This is
on the trig function, it's especially tough to see where the exponents in weird spot.
I hate that it's just that long to do that. I'm so sorry.
You know, I went to bed this was not for like 32, and like I was thinking super long on the project. Oh,
I've had that, not 32, but I've had a calc class of like 26 kids. I couldn't give like the individual help like I do with you guys.
I like just not.
no, I just like this one. I feel like this was a class that like needs 2 teachers because like whenever you can help us, it like takes forever because the problems take so long.
Well, and that's one of the big reasons I've gone to the flipped classroom, so that I have like all class where I can help you guys now.
Have you explained to him what the flipped classroom is?
I mean, I wrote it out a little bit in our pre-conference schedule.
I know, it's like me trying to dress up her package in a sweatshirt.
Oh, I was trying to be cool. The sweatshirt that me and it was for everything. Yeah. Here's what the shoe. You didn't wear sweatshirt like 1 time last week, so I feel like.
No, Sharon does it like 3 times this week. But the week before that, I don't think Sharon did it. You know what I think about it?
At least I showed up. Honestly.
All right, looks like a lot of people are working on D, so let's finish up C here together.
Who's working on T?
Just looked around and saw a couple people working on D.
Oh, I'm just being honest. I'm still playing in the points for C.
Okay, all right, I'll give you
I'm
C.
just
That's
not
fine.
plugging it in because you have it right there, so I'm just gonna take your word for
Wait, why did I get? Am I supposed to be in radians again?
Yes. Yeah, for
Why did I get the wrong answer?
99.999% of the time, we need to be in radians.
That's a lot of nines.
It is a lot of nines.
Oh, I did square it. Sorry. You know, I definitely all that difference.
I did it ahead of time. I've written down already.
So then, what would your max be since there's two options?
I feel like I'm gonna just not.
It is way easier to find out the graph.
I like the graph.
It is.
I like the graph.
It is absolutely way easier to find on the graph.
My absolute min is zero.
No,
So
wait,
we should
what
just
did
have
we
graph paper
Yes.
with everything, graph everything.
Did you say yes to me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I don't know how to graph that on my hand.
there would be two absolute.
Correct.
Unless it was
Yay.
in
High.
yeah, we can leave next week. 20th. Really good Thursday night.
My sister is begging for snow.
I mean, I don't want school either, but
I just don't like snow.
I like snow when it makes me not have class. When I can sleep in, well, me sleep in.
We could just have a calamity day instead of.
I seriously woke up at 5 o'clock each morning. Like, I could not sleep. And it's like, oh well, I'll just lay in bed, think about my anxiety depressing life.
Alright, so on C here, I think we should get two places where our absolute max occurs, right? If we get the exact same y value, that means that we hit the absolute max twice, right? And that happens at 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. And then my absolute min on this interval actually happened at one of the endpoints, right? It happened at x equals 0, and our value was -1. So if I asked you, what is the absolute minimum value, what would your answer be?
-1.
-1. Where does the absolute max occur?
Wait, which one?
Yeah, you would just say both, 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3. Okay. Questions on that one? Alright, go ahead and try D then. It does factor, yes.
Oh wait, yeah.
Wait, I'm really bad at factoring.
No, you're not.
Yes,
Do you know how to multiply?
Whenever there's a number,
Do you know how to add? Maybe. Then you know how to factor.
I don't know how to add factor.
Then use the
If A
quadratic
is
formula.
not equal to 1, you have to factor. I mean, you can still start out with x factor. With those two values, you get them, or how you split up your x.
Okay, but how do I over what?
I know that you get.
X factor is the first one and the last one multiplied together. And then the middle one.
So multiply 126, -126, but add 4.
Yep.
Literally just.
No, there could be only two. I mean, it could be possible there are no critical points and you would only test the endpoints. That's possible.
Oh, that makes sense.
Good question. Doesn't matter then. If we don't have to test that point.
How do you feel like the X equals thing?
You mean like if you have a function typed in, how do you like specific values?
Like if I say X equals 0, or X third like that.
Oh, so you can do store. Well, so we would want to store X, you would say X, so that's
What'd you get?
I got -7 over 3.
I got 3 over 3.
You got it. I don't even. I hated X factoring. I'd always use the quadratic formula, but the more I used X factoring, I just got used to it.
I always forget how to use it. I didn't learn that way. I can't even remember the way I learned.
Man, you should have had Miss Bryan or Miss Frazee now. Mrs. Frazee.
oh,
Yeah, don't you forget. You were already almost done.
so 7
Why is there a finance?
so then we take all the values.
I get asked to
and
give
values
that
of, like,
the dance.
yeah.
You want to try one of these problems?
I do. I was wearing like you were drinking a coffee. Okay, it's fine. Honestly, I couldn't feel like you started moving. I was supposed to. It's Mr. Fach AP Calc. You're down. I'm sorry. I didn't know you had it. I put wrong company trying to check my grades before I did the most ever focused. I didn't touch my grades. Yeah.
What is happening?
Ready to like to know, I thought half your conversation was about but what? That's like, oh my god. You are a shit. No. I was just watching it.
I got a -31.
No, I know that's what you like. Wait, why do you only
But
have?
it's 1.5, right?
Oh, it's -7 over 3.
Like 3 over 2 is
Because of that.
Yep.
So like, would I beat my?
Let's
see what I do that.
Yeah, because if you plug -7/3 in, I'll bet you'll get a pretty small number. So that could
Actually,
show up as a.
This is actually a big number.
Oh, is it a really big one?
81. So why did we not use that?
Well, because all we care about is the interval from 0 to 4. -7/3 is not on.
Yes, you do.
Oh, like a while ago.
I really got the question right. I caught a cat. I'm like, all by myself.
Okay, so yeah, why would you use this number if you don't even have one use it? You're not even gonna get a parking spot. Well, it goes to the parking spot.
But I was like, really sitting here, like,
did we get negative 7/3 and 3/2 when we factored and set it equal to 0? But negative 7/3 is not on the interval that I care about, right? So I'm not going to use negative 7/3 as one of my candidates. So the only three possible places we have are the endpoints, 0 and 4, and 3/2. So if I plug those in, I get 7, negative 31.25, and 175. So my absolute max, absolute min, let's see, max would be at 4,175, and min would be at 3/2, negative 31.25.
Isn't there non-calculator? It says calculator.
Yes. Half of the, like exactly half of the test. Well, time-wise, exactly half the test is calculator, half is non-calculator. It's actually, there are more non-calculator questions, even though it's half the time.
So is it kind of like set up with the ACT? Like you can't go back to a part like once you go to like the calculator part?
There's one part that you can go back to. So the way it's set up, the first part, you have an hour to do 30 non-calculator multiple choice questions. The second part is 45 minutes to do 15 calculator multiple choice questions. The third part is 2 calculator free response questions. You have a half an hour to do that. And then the final part.
Half an hour to do 2 problems?
Well, I mean, they're like, 4-part problems. So you get, it's 15 minutes per problem. And then the final part is 4 non-calculator free response problems. So the only part that you can go back to, when you're working on the 4 non-calculator, you can go back to the 2 non-calculator free response, the 2 calculator free response. You just don't have your calculator.
But there's only like
So
60 questions.
There's 45 total multiple choice questions and then 6 free response questions.
So I gotta get like 40 questions right. That will be you can get like a 50%. Okay, so I gotta get like 30. Oh my god, there. Or there's multiple choice. Yeah, honestly, it's like 25%. No, are you
Well, we'll do. Well, I mean, we'll sit down and do 1
You're dead.
leading up to, we'll probably practice tests. Alright, are we feeling okay with this? Okay, to find absolute mins or maxes, we need to find the endpoints, where the derivative equals 0 and where the derivative is undefined. I want to look at this number E, yeah, letter E here real quick.
Nicely done.
Thank you.
It works. It's like what worked me. That's the natural. It works. I was like, why are you yelling? Oh, I was so confused.
Sometimes Sharon just yells random things.
I told you.
At least this one was more school appropriate.
Were you here, Nicole?
Yeah, she's not looking at that.
Alright, so on E, okay, this is the first time where we need to make sure that we can do the problem. Okay, if we think back to our extreme value theorem, we said in order for the extreme value theorem to hold, what had to be true?
It can't be.
Yeah, the function has to be continuous on a closed interval. Is the natural log of x squared minus 9 continuous on this interval? Why not?
Minus.
Probably because I asked that, right? It's not going
If
to be.
it x equals 3.
My kids are the part of
So what
Thirty.
if I plug into a log function?
Negatives.
I can't have negatives or 0, right? Would any of these values on this interval make this negative or 0?
All of them.
Well, yeah, a lot of them, right? If I plug in negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, right? Any of those values in there, all the way up to 3, right? So anything between negative 2 and 3 would make this either negative or 0. So we cannot do this problem, okay? We can't do this problem. We can say that EVT, the extreme value theorem,
Says no.
does not hold because our function f of x is not continuous.
Wait, could you 5 on it be?
So yeah, so it would be continuous from
A certain point.
yeah, from 3 to 5. But the problem says we want to do it on this whole interval, so it doesn't hold on that whole interval. Right? So we can say it's not continuous on this whole interval, -2 to 3. Right? Any of those values we plug in would make this function not defined, right? And therefore not continuous.
Is that how it is on F?
Wait, say that again?
Is that how it is on F log?
Oh,
Well, if you square it before you take the square root, it's a positive.
yeah, we can do that. All right, but we're gonna skip F.
Okay.
So what I want you guys to do tonight, okay, there are 2 Khan Academies. The first one is exactly like what we just did. Okay, you're given endpoints, you're given a function, you need to figure out where the derivative equals 0 or where it's undefined. Test those values in the endpoints. The second one, you are not given endpoints. Okay, so pay attention. Okay, on the second one, you are not given endpoints, but you are still asked for absolute mins and maxes. On these, the only places where you could have an absolute min or max are these 2, right? Since you're not given endpoints. However, there could be a couple where there are no absolute mins or maxes, and you have to think about what a function would look like. For example, if I ask you for, I don't know, 4x to the 4th plus 2x cubed minus 3x squared plus 7. If I ask you for the absolute max of that function, so what does this function look like? I don't really know what it does in the middle. Yeah, it's going to be a polynomial. What are its end behaviors? Right, it's going to do this, right? I have no idea what it does in the middle. I don't care what it does in the middle. But I know its end behaviors look like this. Right? Any positive even polynomial is going to look like this. So what's the absolute max of this function? Yeah, we would say it doesn't have one because it's infinity, right? I don't know what it does in here, but I know it does something like this. So there are questions like that on the second Khan Academy. It might say, what is the absolute max of this function? Well, you would have to understand, since this is a positive even degree polynomial, it doesn't have an absolute max. But it could have an absolute min, yeah. So on the first Khan Academy, you're testing all of these values. On the second one, you're just testing these values, but also you have to understand end behaviors to do that. All right.